right, good morning. And I am Christian Oliver. I'm the EU correspondent at the Financial Times. And you might be wondering what I'm doing here, because despite the very generous introduction by Ms. Hugues, there are probably few people, or there's probably nobody in the room who knows less about district heating than me. So I better probably just explain myself for 2 minutes at the beginning of why I'm here. And that is very much that if there's one word that journalists hate and come to dread, it is moment. Because journalists tend to be interested in things. They go around trying to find interesting stories, and they get their own obsessions, but their editors will always ask them to justify this. And you spend most of your time arguing with editors about stories that you want to send, and they will always use one word, which is moment. You might sort of come across a group of Buddhist monks who've decided to build a biscuit factory in North Korea, and you approach your editors, and they say, oh, you know, it's quite interesting, but why is this a moment? And then you have to start making stuff up, and it's the traditional sort of argument of people with their editors. One of my long-standing sort of interests, having a Bulgarian mother-in-law who I didn't really understand when she first started explaining it, was district heating, was toplifikatia, and the whole system of how it worked. And during 2014, I tried to push this to my editors, and I tried through January, and we were getting a bit of a crisis in Ukraine, and there was energy questions, and can we look at this? No. This was not a moment. This was an impossible story to sell. By summer, something happened, and we had not one story as mentioned, but I think eventually I ended up doing 4 pieces on district energy, which is more than a moment. It's kind of an exceptional thing to happen in terms of energy. So I think I'm here because there's a moment, thankfully, for journalists. And I'd just like to explore with the people here this morning why, but also whether it can be maintained, whether it's going to be sustainable, whether it's going to continue for a long time. And I think really they should probably just start off by introducing themselves and giving a short statement on what they think the most important things we should be looking at here. And we're going to start off with Lily Riahi from the UNEP.
Thanks, and thank you. Is this on? Yeah, it's working? Okay. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this distinguished panel, with this distinguished panel, and at the 37th Euroheat and Power Annual Congress. I believe that this is one of the first times that we at the United Nations Environment Program have partnered with Euroheat and Power on this topic. And I think that very much reflects the discussion today and this morning about the fact that it is a moment. And it's really, I think, for us, it reflects the fact that district energy is not a new concept, of course. It's been 37 congresses now. I guess that's 37 years of this work. And much more with many countries. But it is a moment because district energy has found new relevance at a time where we're seeking practical solutions to climate change and the energy transition. District energy can make, as you know, of course, city-level infrastructure more efficient, but it can also integrate renewable energy sources, and while reducing oil and coal consumption and therefore cost. And in fact, you cannot have the energy transition, in my opinion, without district energy as a core component. You will not be able to reach the full potential of renewable energy. There will be structural barriers to reaching the full potential of renewable energy sources, and you will not be able to reach the full potential of energy efficiency. And therefore, that is why we are working on, that is why the United Nations and its partners launched the District Energy in Cities initiative at the Climate Summit as part of Sustainable Energy for All. And it is in 2014. And it is why we see this as a very critical issue to work on. I think the key topic to discuss is that the fact that district energy allows for the integration of renewable energy and energy efficiency is the very opportunity and the very benefit or why it's so important for the energy transition, but it is also the challenge. It requires new ways of thinking. It requires working across sectors. It requires new business models, new policy models that are much more holistic. It requires vertical integration, working at multiple levels of governance. These are really big challenges at a coordination and capacity level. It's new ways of thinking, new training, new education. For me, it's very, or on a personal note, it's very much like renewable energy was 10 years ago.
No, we're definitely coming to that. Eva Voss, could you?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy. This is really a very topical moment for district heating and cooling. The thing I believe is the most important, that we are going to prepare a heating and cooling strategy. And the main task for this audience here is to look how district heating and cooling fit into this strategy, and how to use this heating and cooling strategy as perhaps a historical opportunity to make district heating a very big part of EU policies and a key instrument to implement, achieve EU strategic objectives on energy, climate, competitiveness, security of supply, and so on.
And next we have Inete Ielite from Riga.
Good morning. I represent the new policy making and new stakeholder engagement in energy planning in cities. Riga City, and Riga City, as all of you know, is the capital of Republic of Latvia, has a long-standing experience in district heating. I have been all my life using the benefits of district heating. I have been lucky, and I think that that happiness and support that is provided with this service is needed for every household in cities in the future. So, but talking about the policy making and district heating and cooling, and you know the pin here, it is very important that the cities and also smaller towns develop services and infrastructure together, engaging inhabitants. And then indeed we can achieve the situation that it is not only greatest asset, as district heating and cooling was referred this morning earlier by President of Euroheat and Power, but that is a basic right, like water, like electricity, public transport, and internet. That I would look forward, because it really enables households and companies to do well, and also to develop innovation, creation, and really create communities that are sustainable. Thank you.
And next we have Manon Janssen from Ecofys.
Good morning. My name is Manon Janssen. I'm the CEO of Ecofys, who supported the cause of EHP for many years. But I'm also the chair of the Dutch Top Sector Energy, and that means I'm responsible for driving innovation across the energy sector in the Netherlands. So I represent the Dutch that Frédéric referred to this morning, but as I live personally in Brussels, I feel entirely excused to think differently. And I do believe sustainability is really, really important. When Paul and I met in Brussels in last October, we talked for a long time, and still we felt we only touched the tip of the iceberg. And Paul asked us, Ecofys, to write a position paper on sustainable heating, which we did and published at the conference in February. So let me just share the key message of that paper with you. First of all, where do we need to be in 2050? You know that the European Union aims for a reduction of 90% of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels, and that equals about 3 kilograms of CO2 per square meter, maximum allowable across the whole building stock. Where are we today? Far away from that. You know, the 25 billion square meters of useful floor area, 70% of that is in residential buildings. The demand for heating and cooling and domestic hot water is about 3,500 terawatt hours a year, and more than 70% of that comes from fossil fuel. And the renovation rates of existing buildings is no more than 1% at best. So there's a big job to be done. What do we Ecofys think needs to happen? It's actually three things. First of all, we believe we must go for significant reduction of energy demand in buildings. Always start with energy efficiency, even though it somehow never sounds as sexy as renewables. Although I'm very happy that Mr. Inete picked up on the energy efficiency report we wrote in his Energy Union. Second, we believe that we must push for a significant increase of the renovation rate to go for at least 2% a year, so double what we have today. And thirdly, we also think that we must go for dramatic change of the heating and cooling system in the building sector and really move to renewables, and that needs to be at least 80% in the slots available. How are we going to get there? 4 elements. We need authentic cooperation of many actors. Leadership, people wanting to work together. We need significant and long-term investments in both buildings and infrastructure, and that calls for strong policy support. We also believe we need to introduce a sharper definition of nearly zero energy buildings in the building renovation to give better guidance, and we believe that we must get guidance to member states to help them develop long-term roadmaps. So that means harmonized directives. It can be done, and it's all in our own hands.
And next we have Thomas Nowak from the European Heat Pump Association.
Yes, thank you, good morning, and thanks for having me here. When I told my board that I would go to Tallinn to talk at the Euroheat and Power conference, they said, "Are you crazy? This is the lion's pit." And you may know that there has been, I had to say that, you may know that there is some dispute between district heating and the heat pumps, and it's country specific, but when Paul and myself met for the first time, we were actually shaking our heads. I mean, Paul comes from district heating. He's a hard-boiled Danfoss guy. I have been grown up in this heat pump world in Brussels. I think I can safely say I built this up. And we couldn't find the difference. And then I said to Paul, I want to show a picture since I cannot say everything I want in an introductory statement. He said, no slides. So what I did is I printed my own picture. What you see here is St. George's Tower in London. And I would ask you to see the district heating system in this, because it is one. And that shows actually why we have no problem and why we really have no real conflict, since every heat pump needs a heat distribution system. We don't call it district heating, we call it heat distribution system. But to run the system efficiently, you need proper design. And I think it's safe to say that the guys that built St. George Tower had to do a very thorough design and have to find out what the demand is and will be in the future. And that's where I think the both worlds meet. We have the same type of components. The district heating needs a heat source. That can be a heat pump, it can be something else, but the heat pump will serve very well in integrating it. And that's, I think it was very well put by Manon and by the others. We need integrative thinking, and I would like to add one point on top of it. We need better models. That's also in Brussels, that's well known, that's claimed for a long time. We need a model that allows us to think how the heating system will look like in 2050, both in decentral and central applications, and which technology has a room where. And if we manage that, then we will have an efficient system based on renewables, 90% decarbonized.
Right, yes, I've got to say these sort of life of Brian rivalries between the groups are entirely new to me. Paul, finally.
Yeah. It's hot under these lights. Can I have one of these bottle opener things before we do anything else? Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. So good morning, everyone. So I'm Paul from Euroheat. We've already heard a lot about district heating today, and I'm sure we're going to hear lots more. So I'm going to do something slightly different and just tell you a quick story, which I think picks up on some of the themes that we've heard about this morning. Just after I started at Euroheat and Power, I heard about a conference on energy efficiency as a tool for energy security, organized by the European Commission. We weren't invited. I wasn't invited. We weren't invited, which worried me a little bit because I felt it was kind of in our area. So I called up the Commission and said, look, this is a bit strange and we'd like to come and so forth. And after a lot of phone calls, I was granted access to the meeting. So I thought the problem was solved. I went there on the day and found a new problem. Everyone else had a chair with one of these. I didn't. And kind of stood there feeling a bit awkward, wondering what to do. And then I saw that the Croatian delegation hadn't showed up. So I thought, right, I got myself a chair. I sat down, I thought, okay, now I'm going to participate. So I'm kind of waiting, and eventually I caught the eye of the person chairing the meeting, and he looked at me, and I thought, oh good, he's recognized me, I'm going to get my chance to talk. So I'm getting myself ready, I've got my 5 points, and he looks over and says, great, Croatia, what do you have to say? And now I'm thinking, right, do I explain this, which is very embarrassing, or do I spend 5 minutes pretending to be the Croatian administration? In the end, I kind of did one thing nor the other and mumbled something about primary energy and didn't feel very good about the whole thing. And one more humiliation a few minutes later, I'm sitting there kind of starting to relax again, and I get this tap on the shoulder. The Croatian delegation arrived. Thomas had a chair.
That was great too.
So I kind of got up and sorry, and I thought, well, I can sit at the back somewhere, I guess, kind of, where I can do what I feel like doing, which is just sort of go. So I left, and I took a long walk, and I kind of consider that to have been my first real day on the job, because I walked for a long time, and I thought about what had happened and why and what needed to change so that it didn't happen again. And you know, you have these little blessings in disguise. And that was a really important day for me, and I think somehow for us. And I think, you know, it's been a little bit more than a year since that day, and I would like to think that that's probably not going to happen next time, and if it does, at the very least, the guy's not going to call me Croatia. We are having something of a moment, and I think the reason for that is that the fundamentals of our arguments, of our case, are sound. And you know, in the end, that's not us, that's you. That's you who build these businesses, who make this technology that works and allows us to go forward with confidence and talk about what we can contribute. So thank you, and yeah, let's see about making this moment stretch out a little longer.
Okay, well, let's concentrate on what those fundamentals are, and we should probably go to Lily to start with, who's got the experience of drawing on the knowledge built up through the UN report. Part of why we find that it's easy to write about and why it's getting a lot of political interest is actually a security issue at the moment. Energy is a very popular issue because of Gazprom, because of the conflict in Ukraine. I mean, looking on the broader momentum of the environmental targeting, of the things needed to keep this working, I mean, how much is there a danger that it could fall off the political agenda, that at the moment we're a moment that is quite hard to sustain? How sustainable is it?
I don't think it's going to fall off the political agenda. I think I think that this moment is like a bit of a tipping point in the awareness of the role that district energy can play in the energy transition. And I think that district energy presents multiple benefits, and that's sort of one of the things we saw in the report and the research was there's so many different drivers for district energy depending on your local conditions, depending on whether you're a city with refurbishment, with existing assets, whether you're newly developed. It's just so many. You know, you have energy security. You also have, for example, the use of a lot of electricity for air conditioning, which is a big issue in a lot of countries, you know, especially with growing cooling demand. And you know, so, I mean, you have the ability to use local resources in countries like Germany and Denmark. It's obviously the cornerstone of their transition to 100% renewables. So I really think that, you know, it's definitely not falling off the map. So to address that question, I don't think we really have a problem. I think the problem we have is just in making sure we work together to disseminate the messages and the best practices and build the awareness. And I think that it's a little bit of a, not always a sexy, easy thing to sell. There's multiple components in a district energy approach. It isn't necessarily one technology. I mean, there's the infrastructure, but there's the multiple components. It requires a bit of a concerted communications effort, I think. But the stories and the facts speak for themselves. So,
Paul, you're probably the person on the front line of this, as the guy representing the industry and keeping the momentum running. Yeah. I mean, how confident are you now that the ball has started rolling and that you just have to keep sort of, you can let it go now?
Yeah. Well, look, this, you know, I sometimes sit and pretend like I knew this was coming and we've planned every step of this. It's not entirely true. I'm like a kid at Christmas right now, and I think that the guys in the office find it pretty funny. I'm still excited and to some extent surprised by the speed of all this. At the same time, like I said, the fundamentals are such that, and I really agree with what Lily just said, the basic question that we've been asking is, sorry, how else are you going to manage this energy transition? And I do think that this has gained enough, what is it everyone says now, traction in Brussels, that it would be very, very difficult to step back from it. So there is going to be a discussion around this, and it's getting louder rather than quieter. I think what's important for us now and what's challenging for us now is to have that discussion in the right way. It's more sophisticated. It's easy to act like a kind of protest organization. And that's effectively what we've been doing the last 12 months or so. We've been shouting at people saying, sorry, where's your heat policy? You're ignoring this, and so forth. And it takes energy and time, but it's not complicated. The next phase of this, and it's what Frederick mentioned in his speech, is a more sophisticated, more refined conversation about exactly how to take the fact that heat's important and that district heating is useful and shape the regulatory agenda accordingly. So there's a challenge for us, but I'm not at all concerned that the discussion is going to disappear.
Eva, how did this happen in EU terms? Because I'm sure for a long time there was a lot of focus on transport, that transport was often the thing that you'd often see stressed and identified. And then, I don't know whether it was entirely last year, but it started to happen a lot more. Heating would come in right there with transport at the top. And how did that process happen within the EU institutions, that the two were almost married together? Was it just Paul shouting at you?
It played a lot. It had a big role that Paul was extremely active, but not only Paul, but Thomas and the so-called Heat Coalition that have been very active in the last 2 years. The European Parliament was agreeing that heat is a Cinderella of EU energy policy. And then, prompted by these calls, we started to look at the importance of heating and cooling, and we just tried to look at the math, and we realized that it is half of the EU energy consumption, primary and final, and we need to take it seriously if we want really to get this 2 centigrade goal to limit climate change and for energy efficiency and renewable deployment. But on the other hand, I must say that we already have district heating in focus, so it is not entirely true that it's not an unknown subject. If we are looking at what is there today, we have the Energy Efficiency Directive that is basically mandates member states to look at their potential for efficient district heating and cooling, and this is defined as district heating and cooling that has at least 50% renewables, 70% cogeneration, 50% waste heat, or a combination of that. And this is also in the Renewable Energy Directive, it's also in the EPBD, but and then most perhaps, which is less visible, that in the Horizon 2020 work program, and before that in the Intelligent Energy Europe program, district heating plays an immense part. So currently in the Horizon 2020 research and development program for the EU, there are many calls that relate to district heating, and these are going to produce their impact. So district heating is there, but there is no a systemic understanding of what the role can be, and there is no systemic understanding of the heating and cooling sector as such, because it's so fragmented, so diverse. So this is what we will have to look, and this is not going to fall off the agenda, because it is now in the energy strategy, the roadmap, and it is really a question of how to do it. And the key question, I think, for this conference today to understand that what is most challenging is to bring the urban dimension into this debate, and how to do this in a policy instrument at EU level, where we have subsidiarity and so. So the urban dimension is also being recognized, but we have to think of how to translate this into policy instrument, and your insight on that from the obstacles and hurdles that the industry meets on the ground would be really useful to this work that we are doing.
Yes, I mean, now, as you said, I mean, we're on the map now, but the key challenge is how do you actually do this? And Inete, would you give us some of your experience from Riga as an example of how you do this, particularly in terms of what you need to do in public-private partnerships, financing. Just give us Riga's story, if you like.
Thank you. Well, I think that one of the lessons what we have learned in Riga is that we should switch from supply-side approach, which was good in 90s, to an integrated approach, and we have a couple of good examples for that. If you look at the policy documents, what we have developed over these 2 decades, then indeed it was district heating supply policy, electricity supply or so. Now we have Riga Sustainable Energy Action Plan for Smart City. And that engages different companies to talk and also different actions. And integrated planning is one of the keys. First of all, we are very proud of Riga District Heating Company achievements. And I think one of the greatest assets is that it is partly municipally owned. And I have shared views with a number of European cities. It has been found to be an asset if municipality has been owning, at least partly, utility. But of course, there are also very good examples of private companies providing district heating in my country or in neighboring countries. So, first of all, is to have the right fora to talk with those who actually produce energy and engage them with the inhabitants. And earlier this morning, a Minister of Economic Affairs and Communications of Estonia referred to affordable costs. And one of the issues for everyone in Riga for the last 20 years, every household is how can we afford to pay district heating? Because it is very necessary cost. And if we could compare just a couple of cases where some apartments have been switched off, and at the moment, if you purely have the gas heated apartment, it is half of the cost, even though the district heating company would say that about 85% of their bill consists of their gas cost. So obviously, not at the reducing, not the creating heat, but actually using it is the problem. And there, Manon was very right. Energy efficiency is the one way where to go. And in Riga, we have to solve the issue how we can deal with energy efficiency directive, because it hasn't been transposed yet in our legislation. And it cannot be at the cost of the inhabitant in the end. Because, first of all, there are countries that probably biggest part of population can afford it, but not really in my country. So that's why you need a couple of things. And in Riga, we have a very good instrument, and that is Riga Energy Agency. Also, there is in Tallinn one. We are very happy to partner. And the role of Energy Agency, first of all, is to help for inhabitants to make the decisions. And you all are aware, for instance, that also there are companies coming with energy service initiatives. And one of the things, not only in Riga, but probably in other cities, they say, well, we would go for heat pumps or other renewables. We switch off the district heating. And inhabitants on one hand say, well, we want the cheap. And not always thinking of broader picture and efficiency. So municipality has to make the rules and the clarify the things.
Just to pick up there, what's the sort of scale of this issue at the moment of people cutting themselves off the district heating system?
It's not large, but well, it depends. In Riga, it's not large because our district heating system is well developed. But it's not really about cutting off. It's about finding the right way. For instance, we have in Riga a pilot project with ground source heat pumps, which were placed in kindergarten, where to provide district heating would be too costly. So we have renewables in a number of those kindergartens, and that was decided by the city in the policy paper I referred earlier to. And city has served as a role model where it's not visible to have the district heating, then you can have the other tool to use. So being a role model for the city to show the good example, that's one role. Second, it is to engage and provide necessary advice and fora for stakeholders. What can do the specifically allocated administrative structures like energy agency? That's second what cities have to do. And third, what Riga does. We do need to create an instrument that enable inhabitants to achieve energy efficiency in their homes. And that would make the district heating just flying colors, because then we wouldn't open the windows on the top floors, but really use every bit of energy as it is supposed to be very effective and efficient. So empowering citizens.
Yeah. How does that compare with the situation in the Netherlands, Manon? What's the sort of the direction of travel in terms of how this gets done?
Well, if you look back at the past 2-3 years in the Netherlands, is there anybody from the Netherlands here, by the way? Okay, so you'll understand what I'm about to say. There's a few things that happen that are really interesting. First of all, we wrote our energy deal in 2012, and that was our version of the Energiewende in Germany 20 years later. And it was a historic event in the sense that for the first time ever, we, meaning the energy sector and the government, agreed on a few key things to achieve. But interestingly enough, it was about everything except heating. It was about electricity, renewables, transportation. Heating was not in there. And then what happened about a year ago, I think we finally admitted that our gas is running out. And that at the level of consumption of 2012, we probably have about 8 years left. To boot, we had a number of earthshakes, not as big as you would see on BBC, thank God for that, but enough to really, really get public attention to the fact that we can't be pumping gas out of the ground to the same extent as we've been doing the past 60 years. And so all of a sudden there was a need for change. And what happened in the past 3 months is that we are finally embracing a heating vision, a vision for the Netherlands to say, our heating is really important and it needs to become sustainable, and that means we've got a few challenges. The second thing that happened at the same time in the past year and a half is that there's a lot of power moved to cities. And cities are incredibly more ambitious than the national government because they have an integrated system. They actually see the people, they have the issues, they live them firsthand. And we've got a healthy spirit of competition in our country. And so I can see there's this competition developing between some of the major cities to be completely CO2 neutral in the next 30, 35 years. And heating plays an incredibly important role in that. So I've seen a tipping point arrive in the past 2 years. A lot of challenges to do that because Rotterdam isn't The Hague, isn't Amsterdam. And they all have that same ambition and have very different needs. But what I really encourage is to see initiative and leadership go back to smaller parts of the country, to people. And I think in the end, it's, remember what we talked about in Bonn, it's leadership and it's the pig-headedness to go through that will make the difference.
We'll come back to that, because I mean, mayors and municipalities seem really important in this question of how this gets done. But just to follow up, what do you think is the primary motivation for these cities setting these targets in terms of, they might have green companies who they think they're going to foster certain green growth in the economy. Why are they doing it? Because basically they're just setting a huge challenge for the mayor, 3 or 4 mayors down the line. It's not their problem anymore, but they're just setting a mighty great target for those guys. What's their real motivation for doing it?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I'm just guessing. So I think it's on the one hand, cities live the problems. It's much more real to think about waste and air and energy when you live in a big city than when you govern a country from afar. Second, I think mayors are incredibly ambitious and driving people, and I think the Convention of Mayors probably had something to do with that. So I think it's actually really back to the individuals who've set that target for themselves because they know it has to be done. Most people will be living in cities, and because I think they can make a difference, and it's real for them. But it's probably really, really different when you would see the individuals. If you look at the mayor of Paris versus mayor of Amsterdam, the mayor of Rotterdam, who was at the convention in New York, had a really, really strong statement, and he's really personally engaged to do that. So maybe personal leadership again. Yeah,
I think we'll come back to this because it's a very interesting point. I mean, finally, just to Thomas. Just tell us a little bit about how these things get done specifically with heat pumps, and particularly, I mean, sort of help me out a bit, because I think my vision of heat pumps is a bit wrong. Because I think I'm thinking of, there is district heating networks in cities, and then in more rural, spread out areas, you can use heat pumps. But I'm sort of sensing you're talking more about bringing the heat pumps into the district heating networks, how you plug in the heating there. I mean, talk about, in both cases, really, again, how this gets done, the financing for those kind of operations, and just sort of help explain a little bit more what is the latest state of play with these kind of things that you've got your picture of here.
I take my picture again.
Yeah.
This building has 52 stories. In the basement there is a large heat pump. In the top there is a wind turbine. Maybe that's only for illustrative purposes, but it's there. and the thing for that is that this type of heat pump the heat pump provides heating and cooling. Any heat pump provides heating and cooling at the same time. Most of you know that anyhow, and hot water. So how does that integrate? And I think that's the important question. When Paul and I myself met, one of these several meetings that we had, then we said maybe we could define something like 50-50 for 2050, because if we understand that the majority of Europeans will live in cities, that's roughly the 150, and the other half lives in rural areas, and they don't have biomass at their hands, so let's not start another discussion. Then you have a rough split up of what you can do to integrate renewable energy for heating and cooling and hot water production. And it integrates. The biggest heat pump today runs in district heating systems. The oldest, biggest one is in Stockholm. The probably now biggest one and newest one is in Helsinki, and I think others will follow because it makes sense. We have a very good heat pump in district heating system in Oslo. Surprisingly enough, in Scandinavian countries, where people used to say that, well, you know, it's too cold, so the heat pump will not work, but they use the water of the Baltic Sea, and well, so there is enough energy in there. In terms of financing, it's a huge infrastructure project, so it has to have access to financing, which should actually be quite simple at the moment, but of course it's only a part of a system. So if the district heating system makes sense, then the heat pump, the large heat pump, can meaningfully contribute to it. In the individual segment, it's different. If I take my own example, I have a heat pump and I have photovoltaics. So again, it's a system. It's an integration of energy and combustion. And I see you nodding, but it works very well. And I explained to you, and it makes economically perfect sense. So it's a matter of individual preference, because the initial investment is more expensive. So I have to take care of finding financial sources to allow me to do that. But in the end, the disadvantage of this as an individual decision is that I'm not getting any compensation for me helping. I live in Germany, so for me helping Germany or Europe to achieve the energy and climate targets. My house is much less energy demanding than comparable houses, but I'm rarely getting any support for that. So you can say, well, what do we need to do? Maybe we don't need subsidies, because that's a delicate topic, especially in these times of austerity. But certainly what we don't need in the future, and I think that goes both for heat pumps and for district heating, or for the systems of both, is subsidies for fossil fuels, because that is distorting markets where everybody is always asking for a level playing field. So that has to be dropped. And if you see that we talk about 80 billions in Europe alone, and worldwide is even much more than that. I think I recall 500 billion in 2013. Then that has to stop immediately to allow us to transition towards a greener and more energy efficient energy system.
What sort of, I mean, when you're looking at the durations of big projects that use heat pumps, what is the duration that the bankers will be looking at as sort of payback time for these sort of projects?
I'm not a banker. That's too much to say. What I can tell you is that the large heat pump people that I talk to, they say it's a very challenging environment. If you talk to industry, because it's not only residential, there's also a tremendous demand, and you can do it as heat distribution systems in industry, in commercial. They look at payback times of 3 years maximum. But one guy said to me, you know, where we make the fastest inroad is washing, cleaning services. Because in cleaning services, you have to heat up the wash, then you cool it down again, and then you dry. And if you can keep that energy flowing in a circle by moving it back and forth from the heating side to the cooling side, and you do a heat pump in that, the payback time, I don't even dare to say payback, because it's just it's 3 months. So it's not even an investment. They have it back within 1 year. And that's where it works. But also other applications are possible in this 3-year time frame, even though it's very challenging.
Right. And Paul, finally, on the execution, where you see the priorities there.
Yeah, I mean, we keep talking about integrated energy systems. We have to now start to think about integrated policy frameworks. So for me, what's going to be important the next year or 2 or 3 is kind of moving beyond this consensus that we need some kind of heat policy and seeing what that means for other aspects of European energy policy. And I'm sure Eva will talk about it in a little bit more detail. It seems to me we need to think about the relationship between heat and buildings. If I think about the discussion about energy efficiency buildings the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, I've followed it quite closely. It has tended to be a discussion about how we can get rid of this awful thing that is heat demand. And I think, unnecessary heat demand is a really good thing to get rid of. But, well, I don't think I need to tell many of you in this room, you reach a point where you get diminishing returns on that effort to get rid of heat demand, and it starts to make sense to stop trying to get rid of it and start trying to provide it in a way that is consistent with our broader climate and energy objectives. So a new approach to buildings policy is necessary, but we're going to have a big discussion in Brussels starting about now on the future of the European Building Performance Directive. The second thing is market design, and this is a kind of emerging subject for us. I still have a lot to learn about it, but when people say integrated energy systems, they mean stop talking exclusively about the design of the electricity market and start talking about the design of the energy market. And it is our view that the heating sector, and particularly district heating networks and heat pumps, have a role to play in building that better market design, that integrated market design that takes advantage of the fact that there can be and should be a relationship between heat, power, and mobility, the 3 bits of our energy system. If we can sort those 2 things out, and stop. What is it we don't like? We don't like thinking in silos. Nobody likes thinking in silos. And it is one of the problems that we've had. Heat and district heating have been off in their own little corner. And I think if you want to get the most out of the technology, if you want to do the things that my fellow panelists have been describing, you need to stop thinking that way and take a more of a helicopter view. But it's coming. I mean, even on the building side, it used to be that I would begin to talk about efficient district heating and would be told, you're the enemy of energy efficiency, you want to supply heat. I think we're starting to move beyond that a little bit into a more nuanced conversation about the best way to optimize these 2 tools that we have, reducing demand and improving the way that we supply. So I'm more optimistic than I was 12 months ago.
Yeah. Let's go back now to this issue of the mayors, because I find this a fascinating subject, because when I started looking into this, I mean, every one of these towns that you find there's a successful project, there's often a bloody-minded mayor who's really set himself towards this. Sometimes regardless of what state policy is, or regardless of what EU policy is, they've just decided to really set their colours on this. I mean, just tell me, let's start with Lily and what you found out when you were looking into the cities that had been successful. I mean, these are people who have to persuade their voters often that they're going to just dig up the roads and start laying pipes and cause a lot of chaos in the cities. I mean, is it going to be entirely the responsibility of municipalities? How much is taken out of their hands? How much is just dependent on a few charismatic individuals to make this happen?
I think that it's definitely not going to be just the few charismatic individuals. In the cities that we looked at, there was often the need for a political will, and it's very important to have that, because you need the target to create some kind of a security in the market for investors, and also to be able to have the different stakeholders come together under a vision. And because there's so many different actors, the target is necessary to tell each of the different actors how they can benefit together under this target. So like a vision is very, very important. I think that the cities are very important. So there's the mayor, the political vision, but then there's also the fact that there's very practical things in cities. They are owners of multiple utilities, and we're moving past the model in district heating, which is just the traditional heating end-user model. You have a lot of multiple, wastewater utilities. You're using a lot of different utilities and connecting them in multiple utility approaches. So that's something that is very critical. And then there's the fact that we found that cities were the most, best placed to mitigate risk and the associated costs with perceived risk in district heating. They were actually the best ones, and there's so many different reasons for that. But a lot we define it as them having 4 different roles. So you can have a city as a facilitator of finance, and that can be using a lot of their assets and their anchor loads, which is extremely critical in making the case for district heating. So and they can also act as a regulator. In that case, you're creating, for example, zoning bylaws that are all things that the city has to do. So it is, yes, largely the city, but it's the city to then bring in the private sector expertise and investment. With regards to business models, we found the majority of the business models had public sector involvement. But that does not mean that they were public utilities always. It could also mean that they own the network, and you had the other players coming in to operate and such. I think that in a lot of the cities we spoke to, the reason why they were doing it, it really often, in some cases it was the directive that's really pushing this forward, and you hear that a lot, like from a lot of the cities, for example, like Milan, and a lot of cities were saying they're now actually looking at their integrated planning because of the energy efficiency directive. But you also had many cities looking at it like from an economic perspective. Yeah. They have a lot of energy demand. They have a lot of growth, and district heating allows them to manage that most efficiently with local resources. And there's a lot of waste heat that cities cannot use. You cannot use waste heat and to deliver end user services in buildings, like heating and cooling buildings and hot water, without using a heat network. Yeah. And so there's a lot of free resources, and when they become aware of that they can use waste heat from sewage, and they can use waste heat from the industrial plants, then they get very, very excited because that's an economic proposition.
I mean, one example from your study that I thought was very interesting was the Chinese city of Anshan, which has this steel plant in the middle.
1 gigawatt.
But again, that was very interesting in the sense that there's a Chinese national sense of what should be done, but there's also the local Communist Party's idea of what should be done, Danfoss's plan of what should be done. There's the municipality's idea of what should be done. There's the steel company's idea of what should be done. And it took a very, very long time for all those people to come together and agree. And if I put that over to Riga, for example, use another example. I mean, how difficult is it to tie up all these fighting bodies of who thinks what should be done, where and when within Riga?
Well, I think we have a few tips for that. My mic doesn't work. Does it? Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, so we have a couple of tips in Riga, and I think that in many places, if electricity would be considered a national government matter, district heating would lie solely sort of in domain of local leaders. Yeah. And in the end, especially here in Baltic states or in other Nordic countries, people cannot live without warm houses. So mayors face the reality to provide these services. And that is a big force to drive. And also, I have noticed that irrespective of political affiliates, mayors tend to go beyond what governments have adopted. I think I have seen examples of Oslo, of Stockholm, of Helsinki, also Riga. So we drive the governments, and actually in Riga Sustainable Energy Action Plan, we not only look at the financial sources and try to negotiate with governments the relevant structural fund investments for the energy efficiency and technology innovation in district heating and cities, but we also look at what legislation we need in cities, so to propose it to government. And one of the examples for waste incineration, where we couldn't put the heating into the district pipes because it was too far away to deliver. So, for instance, we created greenhouses and have created jobs for people to work in greenhouses. So, and that is good for everyone. So I think that it's about finding the right solutions and talking to stakeholders and aligning strategic aims. And this we also do with our major stakeholders to align the strategic goals and development potentials.
Yeah. I mean, Manon, as you said, you also wear this second hat as the top energy sector in Holland. I mean, tell you how you need to do this within the Dutch structure of putting all these heads together and making it work holistically.
Well, from the the top-down part, what we do, and I think it's something that other countries could really benefit from, is we actually help develop the building blocks for the energy transition. So we drive innovation with government funds to make sure that what needs to happen in the energy transition actually happens, and we do that in a public-private partnership together with all the actors on the market. But I was actually thinking about the cities, because here's where most of our innovation work actually comes together. So rather than talking about an R&D development program, we are actually now talking about places, crossovers as we call them, where things come. Urban energy is one of those themes. And I was just thinking, let me tell you a little story. I sit on a expert opinion group for one of the big cities in the Netherlands. I will not name it. And we've been asked by the group that governs the city, not just the mayor, to give a second opinion on a business case for a heating company. And this group is divided. One person wants sustainable heating, the other one only wants to optimize economics. They've written a business case which is not a business case, which is an ambition turned into, and it has only one option for all the dials on the dashboard. But the interesting question really is, what are they trying to solve? What problem are they trying to solve? So it is a very complex problem to understand what a city wants, which is being CO2 neutral, and how do you translate that into a solution that fits that particular city? For instance, this city is banking on geothermal energy. It doesn't have enough in the underground. It banks on waste heat, which you won't be able to buy in 20 years from now because the port of Rotterdam will actually reduce their waste heat. So if you think of the complexity of this business case and you look at it with a distance, and you're not responsible for running the city, it's incredibly complex to manage, but you can also see where ambition, which is good, gets spoiled by the desire to make it happen quickly, which is not good. And the balance is keeping the ambition but making it a realistic business case. That's what I'm trying to do, and that's what I'm going to focus on the next 2 years.
I mean, just to broaden that out a little bit, because I'm conscious I'm sort of neglecting you a little bit, Eva, on there's this element of the targets, of the big umbrella national and supranational targets like the EU level ones for the 2030 targets, and how they fit into these models. Because I know a lot of these guys will have been lobbying hard for an actual binding target on energy efficiency, and the EU took another path. I mean, in terms of how that works, in terms of these companies going their own way, finding their own route towards the big goal, which is on emissions reduction, choosing their own route towards it, how you have a sort of coherent policy around the targeting, just the way what we're talking about is the big umbrella target and how that tessellates or fits into what each of these very diverse little communities is doing, their tailor-made projects. You just sort of how that's worked, particularly in this heating and cooling sector.
How does it work? It depends on the member states, but that's really the key, as Manon and Inete mentioned, that the EU role is to set these overarching strategies and visions. And if these are ambitious enough in terms of decarbonization, energy efficiency, actually there is no way to leave out cities, because cities are the major energy consumers, and they are the one that can it happen. At EU level, we don't have real mandate to target, to say what cities should do. We have the Covenant of Mayor, which is a voluntary scheme, a very successful one. There are more than 4,000 cities now signing up to sustainable energy plans. And then at EU level, we have the overarching strategy. We have to set them right and correctly and give direction to member states, and member states will hopefully trickle this down to their local and regional authorities. We also start having tools for that. For example, the heat planning, or the comprehensive assessment as we call it. I remember it was a long fight, and at the end of the negotiation, member states managed to put one sentence in it, that the comprehensive assessment can be an assembly of local heat plannings, meaning that we believe that to do very well a comprehensive assessment on heating and cooling, that should basically define how to develop district heating, how to combine it with energy efficiency improvements in building industry, then this really should be done at the granularity that is done to the municipal city level. So we have starting to have drivers. I think setting the right strategy is key. And then at EU level, we can provide helps, best practice exchanges, how to translate this, and offer methodologies for member states to do that, and cities will have a key role in this kind of implementation as policies. And we also take a lot of inspiration from them.
I mean, Thomas, does it work that way round?
Oh, well, that's a broader question. I think Eva and also the whole DG Energy, they are doing a very good job. I would also say that maybe it's safe to say that at one point in time, our lobby activities helped them do what they wanted to do. I think we have a group of very dedicated individuals that also now need a public request for this type of work. I do think, however, that also the Commission could provide some tools to help us do it faster, because as you can guess, it's quite an opinionated debate, and you ask yourself, how do we bring the people with the different opinions together? Not all of them share the same opinion, and so it would be helpful to bring facts to the game, and I think it can be done by providing planning tools and by providing best practice examples. Some of it is done already, but it can certainly be done more and more coherent. And now, since you mentioned financing before, I would like to stress that yes, we would like to have had a binding energy efficiency target, so we didn't get that. But what we would like to have now is that in all this discussion on the Juncker money and in large infrastructure projects, that energy efficiency is not only one goal inter alia, but it should be the preferred goal. What I'm trying to say is we have energy targets, energy efficiency targets, renewable targets, and greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and we still take decisions that are not guided along the lines of these targets. And that should change, and I think that is something that can be changed on the European level to be then trickled down to the local level.
I mean, what are your feelings, Manon? Because in many cases, when you look at, again, going back to these mayors, they seem to have been setting themselves targets based on energy efficiency, regardless of whether there's a binding target or not, and in many ways more ambitious than anything that would have been mandated by Brussels.
Yes, but it would really help if we would have a push and pull strategy. I just believe it would get more discipline, more people on board, and you wouldn't have to rely on the top 20% who wants to do it anyway. I know the struggle, Eva. We support you from Ecofys for a long time, but it's really hard. It would really help. It's like the discipline when you go on a diet. It's the intention, but also to make sure somebody's watching over you. So I think it would go faster if we would have the binding targets. But it's great that we have people who don't need a target to do what they think is right.
I mean, let's just, look at a sort of the model for Europe more broadly. Because, there are certain areas where there's a heritage of this in Scandinavia, where they know sort of how this has worked around the Baltic as well. And then you have areas like Britain that are still pretty much in the Stone Age when it comes to these technologies. And just, if you can sort of map out, how is this going to work? Because certainly, even if you had an old Soviet-era model in Latvia that was inefficient, or you had pipes above ground, at least it was there. So you can modernize it and refit it. How, just sort of map out for us the difference in the challenges. It's probably Paul who takes the more sort of broad strategic view of the continent here. The difference between this, the difference between a Latvia and a Britain, basically, the modernization and the ones of how you start afresh, or you get the culture going somewhere where this doesn't even really exist in the mindset at all.
Christian, you should know better. All right, let's talk about Britain for a minute. Look, I'm like Thomas says, I used to be a hard-boiled Danfoss guy, and one of my first jobs with Danfoss was looking into the development of district energy networks in the UK. And of course, the first thing I was told was, well, there's nothing. I had a conversation with my dad who told me, no, there was something. They did something in Sheffield in the 60s, and it was rubbish. And that I should change jobs as quickly as I possibly could. I decided to ignore him. I went over and had a look. And look, district energy in the UK is not what it is in Denmark. But there's a lot happening at the moment. I think I visited 20 medium to large size cities from London to Newcastle to Nottingham and so on. And what I found, without exception, was that there either is district heating already in the ground, or there are genuine plans at the level of the city council to develop it. And this reflects a change that's gone on with UK energy policy. And I know we have people from the UK who'll talk about it in more detail later on. But I've watched this, and a few years ago it seemed to me that UK energy policy was pretty simple. We'll electrify everything, we'll put in some insulation, job done. It turns out it's a little bit more complicated than that, and that reality began to kind of take hold in the Department for Energy and Climate Change in sort of 2012. And since then they have published a very visionary paper on the future of heat in Britain. And I think it's really important what goes on in England, because it is, as you say, a country without a very rich district energy tradition. And in that sense, if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. And what they are saying very explicitly, and it's worth reading the papers, I often send people to look at the DEC website now for this reason. And if you look at the narrative, it's pretty simple. They say, well, we've got three things to do. We can significantly reduce energy demand in buildings. Let's insulate them. And they've got programs in place to try and make that happen. Then we've got our cities to deal with, and there the natural solution is district energy. And then we've got the rural dimension, and there we need heat pumps. And of course, as Thomas has said, there's some crossover there, because heat pumps do make sense on a district heating network in cities. So it is coming. It kind of has to come. I mean, again, we're on the UK, but this could be any number of countries, including the Netherlands. The country heats itself with oil and gas right now, and either we in the UK and we as Europe abandon all plans to decarbonize to 80–90%, or we do something about that. You cannot have it both ways. The two things, as far as I'm concerned, are entirely mutually inconsistent. And once you accept that, and once you decide that you're not going to throw away your ambition to deal with the climate and with your energy security, you come quite quickly to district energy networks. It's not a coincidence that they keep popping up. It is a particularly good fit with a particular set of challenges that we face in countries around Europe and frankly around the world.
I mean, Thomas, tell us a bit more about heat pumps. I mean, you've given us one building in London, but how much do you find about that you're actually in virgin territory where they don't have much of a culture of district heating networks? They are actually interested in heat pumps.
Well, it's a very easy solution from a technical perspective, and it provides a number of benefits that are actually absolutely compatible with the energy and climate and energy targets 2030, and also with the decarbonization scenario of 2050. So yes, I showed you one picture, one building, but there is many more, and I would say that the large heat pumps in industrial and commercial applications are actually the hidden champions. Nobody talks about them. It's pretty much one-off developments, small engineering companies that just buy the components and set them up into motion. And then you find the large guys like, well, not name the companies, but a number of large manufacturers, also international companies that just do megawatts. So you can do the biggest heat pump at the moment, I think it's 35 megawatts in a single piece. And then you put 3, 4, 5, sorry? 50. Okay, so even better. Let's see, there is technology progress also in this field, even though it's only 100 years old. It's not an innovative technology, by the way. The principle was developed in the late 19th century, and now we see it in full operation. It seems to be by many people to be understood that heat pumps go into decentral applications only, I would say. And that's, for us, the next step to say, no, it's not. They provide solutions for residential, for commercial, for industrial, and on the district heating level, and they work quite nice as balancing. I'll tell you one short story. We had a group meeting, and there was a research institute from Austria, and they came and said, look, we have all these district heating networks in Austria, 300, I think, if I recall correctly, and they all run on biomass combustion. very good idea to burn biomass in a central location and then use it as efficient as possible. They said, well, but you know, the planning is a bit more complicated, so we didn't manage to achieve the efficiency that we wanted, mainly because of the fact that we didn't put enough load on the system, and then the return flow was of too high temperature, so the system doesn't run in condensing mode. Engineering mode off. The point is 10 percentage points of efficiency missing. What they then came up as a conclusion is they put in a heat pump, and the heat pump balanced supply and demand better. It reduced the temperature of the backflow. It could run, the whole system could run in condensing mode, and everybody was happy. And that's what I tried to introduce into the heads of the people, is that really it is not a conflict of interest. There is always an economic perspective behind it, no discussion, and that will be longer than we can do today. But from a principle of energy efficiency and from a principle of trying to not throw our targets out of the window and say we really have to do something for 2050 and we have to take ourselves serious and move away from fossil fuels, then both systems are compatible everywhere.
Manon, what's the situation in Holland? Is a lot of this taking virgin territory in terms of district heating and ripping up the streets and putting something entirely new there?
Well, there isn't much virgin territory in the Netherlands at all. I would say it's pretty dense as a country. But I so entirely agree with what Thomas has just said. The Netherlands has a history of district heating, stadswarmte as it's called. But we spend a lot of our innovation money on developing the best compact heat pumps that you can just possibly imagine, and they are compatible. And I think what Thomas is really hinting at, and something that drives me absolutely nuts in this business, is the sense of urgency. The only real enemy we have is time, and we need to combine all smart solutions that we have. It's not a matter of one is more important than the other. If I go back to my story of the city that I kind of advise, they think in just one solution, which is one massive district heating river surrounding the city. They haven't thought about energy efficiency, they haven't thought about compact heat pumps, and I think the combination of these things could be a much better answer than just driving and investing, you know, €1 billion in infrastructure that may actually not be working in 10 years from now. I think it's the combination that we really need to think of, and it's so complex. But that, and if you keep time as an issue in mind, I think will bring us to combine solutions that are much better than we had in the past.
Yes. I mean, Eva, I mean, something I was completely unaware of it, or, you know, is the turf war between district heating and heat pumps and a bit insulation here of these contending lobbyists. To what extent, I mean, do you see this? I mean, you must have, they're not actually working together, but in many ways they're sometimes vying against each other. They're seeing each other as competing technologies.
So, I think here what we need to see is that this district heating will have a winning case if the trade-offs between energy efficiency and in buildings and the supply efficiency are found and the cost is correct. So district heating is a cost-effective instrument to deliver renewable energy in buildings and energy efficiency in buildings. And there comes the planning and the cost calculation for what would be an optimum solution to decarbonize buildings and reduce their energy consumption. And district heating will have a role, and heat pumps will have a role, sometimes in combination, helping each other. Sometimes heat pumps will be an individual solution in let's say, in rural areas. So, but we also have many other instruments to promote district heating. For example, the energy performance of certificate for buildings can include renewable indicators, smart indicators, district heating indicators. So once so it's not just the urban, the planning, the addressing cities directly, but we have many instruments whereby we can help cities to raise their importance within the national governments. And we have to see also in this integrated way that what heat pumps can bring to decarbonization objectives, to energy efficiency objectives, how the heat sector can contribute, for example, to balance the electricity market, how thermal storage can help to integrate renewables, how heat sector can add additional demand for absorbing renewable electricity, very reliable electricity. We have the renovation strategies. We will have to work for building renovation. District heating could play a role. It's already playing a role in these very active cities. For example, in the UK, in other parts of Europe that discovered that district heating is a big part of making their building stock more efficient. Financing, I think we are working already a lot on that at EU level, for example, the Jelena facility, but we are going to work even more to reduce for example, the payback time could be reduced, could be lengthened and so on. So I think we have many instruments, and big part of this that national government and EU level, there must be some strategic integrated approach to see what the role of district heating should be, what the role of individual solutions should be, and find the best cost-value balance between these solutions, and then build implementation around them.
Yeah, I mean, just on that question there, I mean, one of the first Twitter questions we've had in here is on the sort of the role that austerity of the austerity politics will play in generating that finance. But it also comes back to this idea of what are the priorities for the Juncker plan itself, because in Europe you often get sometimes of a little bit of an east-west schism on these points of the direct immediate energy security issues seen as a supply issue, and that the priority projects should be the supply of gas and security of supply, versus what certainly, if you talk to the Poles, they wouldn't sort of fundamentally disagree with, sort of working on district heating, but they see it as more of a longer-term solution, not something that the money should go into instantly. I mean, how do you see at the moment that kind of dynamic working on, I mean, both austerity and the security priorities for getting the money?
The austerity one is that we have to provide mechanism to mobilize private investment and start moving the huge amount of private money that are sitting on the sideline, and we know that they are sitting there. And so we have a work stream working on that. That was Energy Efficiency Financial Institution Group, had some report and conclusions, and we try to build instrument whereby we raise the knowledge of the banking sector on energy efficiency, so they are able to project, to design projects and start moving the money. The other issue, the Juncker plan, we think it's a strategic importance to promote energy efficiency. We have submitted a number of energy efficiency projects, member states by member states, that can be part of that. The problem of energy efficiency that these are small projects, so we need to find a way to agglomerate them and make them into bigger programs and deliver energy efficiency in district heating infrastructure, in building renovation strategies and so on. So we are going to work on that to effectively make energy efficiency as big part of the Juncker project as building a new LNG terminal or a new gas pipeline.
Yeah, Inete, you probably had something to add there on that.
Well, yes, indeed. Well, earlier, Paul referred to English cities. I can tell you, I have seen good examples in Scottish cities. For instance, Glasgow has recently launched a district heating scheme with Scottish Power, and that is Athletes Village for Commonwealth Games, and they plan to go expanding it, and it works. Also in Aberdeen, the apartment blocks that are being heated, but we also see that it is necessary that inhabitants are aware to really agree on that service that is provided. So I will refer in a minute later to that. And second thing is about the financial instruments, because for instance, I know that there is a plan of 3 municipalities in the Netherlands, like Rotterdam and Delft, to put the district heating in place from excess heat from Rotterdam port. But as it is a riskier project than the normal sort of bankable projects by local banks, they are struggling to find the right resources. So now, financial instruments and stakeholders or inhabitants aware of things, this should be dealt. And in Juncker plan, like Latvian government, as it says, they actually proposed energy efficiency measures. But the question is, it is about borrowing money. And if we look at the municipalities, then we have to assess how much money a municipality can borrow at the moment, because most of them have already up to the limits. So it's a number of very important issues, and if we want to have not only bankable but sustainable communities, then we have to find the right ways for Juncker plan. And I think President of European Commission is going to the right way when he was also telling that there should be one stop in Commission for cities. And I also think that everybody here in the audience should go back and look how many cities do they serve and find the Covenant of Mayors website and see have they sign up, because that would be a good start for discussing how we can prepare those bankable projects between the district heating providers and the cities.
Sure. I'm conscious that I should probably take some questions in a minute. There are just probably two things I'd like to touch on before we finish, which I mean is the point that Lily started with, which is bringing the renewables into the mix. Because I've seen that one of the criticisms of district heating is that it's a great way of keeping the fossil fuel power stations going. That this is you burn the gas, you burn the coal, use it in that way, and it sort of stops the immediate push towards whatever it is. Whether it's biomass or geothermal. This was interesting. I went to Copenhagen to have a look at this recently, and it was interesting these tensions inside the town there, even of the use of taking the forests from here, actually from the Baltic, and using the whichever it was, the pellets or the wood chips inside Copenhagen. And the mayor did not think this was a good idea. The mayor thought it was a bad idea. And of course, the main guys working on the power stations thought this was a great sustainable project. So these sort of clashes about what is sustainable energy and how you brought it in, sort of work on those micro levels there as well. I mean, how do you see the general picture of where we're going to go in the next couple of decades in like sort of switching from the fossil fuels to the renewables in the big cities?
I think that's one of the key drivers for a lot of the cities using district heating. It's also, I mean, for one thing, you go from building efficiency to neighborhood efficiency. It allows for new business models, and those business models and economies of scale allow for greater integration of renewable heating and cooling. And they also allow for greater integration of renewable power through things like thermal storage and combined heat and power. There's a lot of synergies in Germany, for example, with combined heat and power and solar PV. And I mean, they go hand in hand, and it's a key, I would say it was one of the top 3 drivers of why cities were doing this. Pollution was another one, but renewables was key. It also can allow for a bridge in terms of fuel switching. So you have many cities like in Sweden where they were able to, take the time to do the fuel switch. If you have the existing infrastructure, it gives you time to bring on the renewables at a point in which it's cost effective for your city. So, I mean, when it comes to renewable energy, you cannot really you won't be able to get to full potential of like solar thermal and geothermal without having a district heating network. And you can't get past the 17% in like the IEA scenarios without balancing and flexibility and integration. And thermal storage, CHP with district heating, these are critical components. And then of course transforming the heating sector, because all the scenarios are always looking like, as we said, at 100% electricity. So we had 11 out of 45 cities achieving 100% renewable energy or carbon neutral targets from district energy. That's like cases, very detailed cases we have on how and why. And that's actually where all of this started from. I mean, the work was very much based on renewable energy in cities and how are cities achieving renewable energy and energy efficiency. And the best practice that emerged was this is a fundamental building block for it. And I also think in the context of all the discussions we've had, it's just, the heat pumps and then the efficiency in buildings and demand reduction. I think it's really, we need a model. I think that's what you had said earlier. And that's something that we'll do also, and we would like to do in the District Energy and Cities Initiative, is we're working with partners. We have 8 private sector partners. We're working with the renewable energy industry associations, all like 5 of them. We have all these different actors, and what we need is to have, as a first step in the cities, an assessment And that was also in the heat roadmap. I think it was like the best recommendation was you need to do these local assessments, and those local assessments then show the economic case, the business case. They bring together the actors. You know, like in Amsterdam, they have this fantastic, you know, heat atlas, and they use that to create business models with the supermarkets and the, you know. So I mean, I'm going a bit away from the renewables, but I just wanted to say that it's the reason I'm saying that is because I'm saying it's a energy transition question. And the policies have to be not about heat pumps or efficiency in buildings or renewables or anything. It has to be, you know, looking at, I don't know, CHP feed-in tariffs so that you can combine, you know, heat and electricity in a way that's smart and sort of subsidize the benefits of heat and the electricity.
I mean, could you just give us like 30 seconds on how
I'm
that
sorry.
works in a real city, like switching from fossil fuels to renewables? Where's Riga at the moment?
Yeah, we introduced biomass in Riga district heating system, and last year we were able to reduce tariff for 3% for district heating.
Well, it's even less than 30
And the plans
seconds.
are going further.
And I suppose just my final point for Thomas, really, on just basically a sort of broad European business question, if you like, that many of the businesses working in this sector seem to be sort of classic, there are some big ones, but there are a lot of classic small Scandinavian, German SMEs. And that raises a very interesting question of how you turn this into a European export model, because you can't have every small German pump maker trying to present itself to, you know, the sort of Chinese authorities. Just how does it work in pulling this together as an export package that works both abroad but also helps build up the momentum inside Europe as well?
That's a good question. Luckily, the SMEs of the size that we talk about are not so small anymore. They are SMEs by definition, but they are still world players. So we do have an export potential for this type of technologies worldwide. How do we package it? I think it's in the end, it's stories. It's examples that show people how to assess the demand and then provide solutions that cater to the variety of demands that you will find in Europe and worldwide.
Is that done? I mean, when I was in Denmark, they've certainly done that very much on a national level. It's kind of the Danish project that goes over there. I mean, is it something that stays as a national level? Is it more pan-European? What's the German situation like, or the Dutch?
I think it's very much in transition in many countries, and what we have to see is this is not only a technology problem. That just comes to my mind while you say Denmark, because in Denmark it runs under certain conditions, and the Danish blueprint runs under certain conditions. Replicating it in other countries may face obstacles that are not technical. So really have to look at the integration of the different people, and potentially this mayors initiative is quite good because the mayors are comparable and they face several similar problems, and they have also a good access and a good grasp of what the local population wants. So you could say maybe the mayors are much more mandated than national leaders to push this energy transition and to push what is necessary to move towards more energy efficiency and renewables.
Right.
And then, in my conclusion, this integrates district, and I would actually say it's energy grids, not so much district. It doesn't matter. It's the energy grid wherever you need it, on a building level, on a regional level, on a district level, and respective technologies. And I hope that heat pumps are majority.
Lily, and then we'll let the audience loose.
I just want to say it's a very big burden for cities to have to also do all of that work. And in interviewing the cities, I mean, it takes them so long. You know, in the Rotterdam case, it's going and talking to the gas utility and finding out where is the bottleneck on the grid and how can we integrate those benefits in the business case. That's capacity building, it's awareness, and it requires a lot of work. And I just think that a little bit of support from national governments or from regional governments to delegate resources for that capacity building can result in tremendous transformation. So I just want to say Elena funds, for example, in London, Greater London Authority, very wealthy city, received, you know, money because the capacity work is such a big, it's project structuring and bringing the different actors together, the developers, all these people, so much work that the City of London had, you know, funding from the Elena funds. And as a result, they've been able to leverage like 60 million in investments in district heating. So little bit, it was like 3 million in loans, and the leveraging was however many times, 60 million in result. So just really want to stress that the capacity component is very, very important.
I'm also very conscious that there are probably people who are itching to ask some questions of the audience, of the panel here. So could you put up your hands, please, if there's somebody who'd like to... Yes, here we are, immediately.
Hello? Is it on? Oh, cool. Camilla Vasiega from Veolia. I have a question regarding financing, because it's a, for me, it's a passionate thing. It's a great topic, actually. How to find funding for development of district heating networks. You've mentioned, all of you mentioned, and made references to Juncker plan. Should I stand up? Sorry.
No, it's all right. That's fine.
No. So you've mentioned Juncker plan and the possibilities it might offer, and you also rightly underlined the fact that it's also debt-based scheme. And if we talk about municipalities, they're already heavily in debt. So also we should remember about how Juncker plan is going to work. Basically, it's a guarantee provided by the European Commission and European Investment Bank that it's supposed to be, it's only 21 billion euro in guarantees, and then it should generate 60 billion euro in by issuing bonds. And then we are supposed to go from 60 to 315 billion euros by attracting private investment. So it's basically a scheme that is based on a trust in private sector going to finance these projects. So we still don't know how projects will be selected. We still don't know what kind of projects will be selected. Recently there has been a plan to ring fence 5 billion euros to energy efficiency. It has been scrapped. And there was hope that district heating networks would be funded through energy efficiency. So today I don't really see how it's going to really work for district heating projects. And I think also we forget about other funding sources that already are there, which are based on subsidies, which is the regional European policy, the cohesion policy, that has been functioning really well. And I think today the real question is not only to look only at Juncker plan, but also how we were going to combine this, guarantee, but essentially debt-based scheme with something that already exists, which is based on subsidies and which could really function really good for these projects. Thank you.
I mean, that's probably one for Eva, isn't it? That sort of how the Juncker plan can actually conjure some kind of animal spirits out of the market. Do you want to? Oh, no, thanks.
Yeah, so I agree that there are already large amount of EU funds available for energy efficiency, and it is at least 38 billion euro earmarked through the European structural and investment funds, and these can be used in pure grant-based free money, or what is our policy direction today is to make these available funds more used in financial engineering and structure it into energy efficiency funds and leverage them with the private sector. The Juncker plan will help again to mobilize this leverage effect, and we are working with the European and international financial institutions to make energy efficiency bankable, and for municipalities to structure energy efficiency projects, to agglomerate small energy efficiency projects in building renovations, whereby private money will find it attractive to come in with guarantees. So basically municipalities will not need to put up that much money, or member states, but rather to provide guarantees. And this is how the Juncker Fund is supposed also to work. But for that we need to help banks, commercial banks and all banks to understand energy efficiency, the benefits, how much money and income stream they can get out of that. And that's a lot of education, capacity building, not only at municipal level, but at banks level. And also it is a capacity building from the demand side of this energy efficiency project for the citizens to understand, for municipalities to be able to structure this project. So this capacity building in each and every level, that will be key to use the scarce, the limited resources that we have from public money to mobilize private funds.
Paul, you have something to add?
Yeah, at the risk of putting him on the spot, I should say to the person who just asked the question, the EIB, the European Investment Bank, is seated just behind you. So there's a subject for the coffee break. The next thing is, look, all this talk about Europe being so poor and so broke, I've had just about enough of it. I can accept the idea that public finances are not in a particularly good state right now. As Eva said, people are sitting on so much money right now. There is money in Europe. We are not flat broke yet. And I think that the biggest thing that the European institutions could do is help mobilize some of that finance, creating confidence in this sector. And that has a lot to do with what's happening now, creating some political and regulatory visibility long-term for the future of the sector. If I'm an investor, I'm looking to see how the regulatory framework is going to evolve when I evaluate different investment opportunities. And the last thing, people who have projects that they'd like funding, that they'd like funded, do let us know. We have actually been trying to reach out to the industry the last 6-8 months on this. And I have to say the response has not been deafening. We are interested in this. The European institutions are interested in funding these kinds of projects. And sometimes, to be honest with you, I'm a little embarrassed because I come back to them and say, well, some of our people are looking into some things. You know, you've all got my phone number. If you've got a project, call us. Let's discuss it. There are people who do want to hear about that.
I just would like to add that actually there is a eagerness to have these projects come out, and there is money. We really need the good projects, and that's why, for example, Greater London Authority used Jelena, which is an EU financial instrument, to structure their project and to get and mobilize EU funds. We really are looking for projects that we can give money. And this is for the cities to build up that capacity and build projects that are convincing for financial institutions, for European investing institutions, and for the private investors.
I've just got one more question here from the gentleman in the...
Martin Hayek, Czech District Association. Well, Christian, I loved your last question, but it was not really answered, because I believe that what we should stress also in advocacy of district heating is that actually it helps create jobs in the EU. And it can be quite good export technology, because the market is not yet that competitive as in other cases. Because Europe poured enormous money into photovoltaics. We completely lost the competitive ground. Now everything is imported. We are pouring enormous amounts of money into wind energy. We are losing competitive ground at the same time there, but with district energy, it's still ours. It's still, the market is not so much competitive. We still have huge expertise there and potential for exports. And it's not mentioned. It just goes, you know, untouched. That this is actually a way to create jobs on local level and help EU industry, which is struggling in many respects.
That's a powerfully made point. Is there a final question for the panel? No, and I think then sort of finally, I think Inete had one final point you wanted to make. And I think that's it.
Well, basically, I think that the financial instruments and the interests of banks should be matched with other stakeholders, because we do not see it at European level, really. And for municipal capacity to borrow money, it's clear, for instance, when in Latvia government wanted to have more kindergartens, then in the budget law, the kindergartens went except from the public debt. And we've got them. if we want to get it, we have to have this regulation. Otherwise, European Investment Bank goes to Belgium and offers cities of Belgium grants for energy efficiency. And I talk to Belgium cities and they say, our local banks give better money, but we cannot all take it. So I think there should be match between everyone also at European level and more talk about it.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And I think it's lunchtime now, isn't it? So you can